This movie highlights the new features in PitStop 12 Update 2, another great version of Enfocus's leading PDF editing software suite. This new update is free for all users of PitStop 12 or 12 Update 1, and there are a lot of new features and functionality included within it. These are the chapters. You can now customize your keyboard shortcuts. You do that by creating a new preset in the PitStop Pro preferences. The operation is straightforward. Choose one of the many things you can do with PitStop Pro and assign a keyboard shortcut to it. I often view the page boxes, and there is no shortcut for it. So I select this function and I use P as a straightforward letter for that shortcut. The combination with the Command key is already used by Acrobat and is not available. The combination of Alt-Command-P is already used to bring up the dialog with the pre-flight profiles. As this shortcut is part of PitStop Pro, I have the option to start using it, in which case I will, of course, lose a shortcut for the pre-flight function, unless I assign a different one to it. But Shift-Command-P still seems to be available, so I choose that one. After saving and applying the change, I can now use the shortcut to toggle the page box viewing on and off. The fact that the keyboard shortcuts are presets means that you can have more than one, but as with all presets, only the applied one is used, of course. It also means that you can export the shortcut preset and import it on a different computer. Note that this exchange will not work across different operating system platforms and that you have to be careful with different versions of Acrobat. You can also save an overview of the shortcuts into a PDF that you can use as a reference. When selecting objects, you can now rotate, scale, and skew objects without selecting different tools. Placing the cursor on the control points of a selected object or group of objects will display new icons that let you do these transformations. Holding down the Shift key while performing an action constrains it. Scaling is proportional, and rotating and skewing are done in increments. When scaling, you can also use the Alt key, in which case the scaling is done from the center of the selection instead of from the control point. And you can, of course, also combine the Alt and Shift keys. PitStop Pro 12 introduced the alignment and distribution of objects. However, this was always based on the bounding box of the selection. You can now choose to align and distribute the selection relative to one of the page boxes, which makes these tools a lot more flexible. Centering objects on a page is now as simple as this. In the user interface of the new features in PitStop 12 to change the brightness and contrast, and to perform unsharp masking, there is now a button to revert the settings to the default values. In the prepress section of the standard global changes, there is a new global change called Apply Color Curves. It is an extension of the image curve functionality added in PitStop Pro 12. But there are a few differences. This global change only works on device CMYK and on individual separations. You have CMYK and Other to start with. For every separation, you set the curve you want, and if you want different curves for specific separations, you add and configure them. Just as an example, I add Reflex Blue as a Pantone that has its own special curve. When you run this global change, you see that the cyan and the reflex blue elements are modified. All other separations are not affected because those curves were linear. Another major difference is that this global change can not only be applied to images, but also to line art, text, and shadings. Constraining the curve change to objects within the trim box allows you to make sure that the color bars outside the trim box are not affected by the curve change. If you want to do something similar for objects in other color spaces, you have to create an action list. You select the objects you need, for example, all images and all texts in RGB, and then you use the action Apply RGB Curve. There are also actions for Apply CMYK Curve, which is what is being used in the previous global change, Apply LAB Curve, and Apply Gray Curve, for use in combination with the respective color spaces. The next new action I would like to present is Add Separation Names. This is what the result looks like, and here are the options with which you can determine the look and position of the separation names. I am sure you will find that the options explain themselves. Another interesting new action allows defining the initial view settings of a PDF. The initial view can be found in the properties of a document, and it determines the way in which a PDF appears when it is opened in Acrobat. So, if you want to force the document to open on page 2 in Total View, you can now do that with the help of an action, and this is the behavior when opening the file. Select Spot Color and Select Font by Name are two actions of a group of about a dozen where we added the ability to use regular expressions. In lots of cases, this makes the selection process a lot easier. Instead of selecting all the possible instances of a font you want to outline, and of combining that with the correct number of operators, as in this example with all the Arial fonts, you can now use a single select with a regular expression, selecting anything that contains Arial and outline it. Please note that regular expressions are not the same as wildcards. This is not the place to give a complete training on regular expressions. They can be pretty complex, but they are also a lot more powerful than just wildcards. There are many resources on the internet where you can find information and examples. If you only need wildcards, then just remember that a dot in regular expressions is equivalent to a question mark in wildcards, and that dot asterisk is the equivalent of asterisk. And finally, on the topic of action lists, 19 new standard action lists have been added. Stop the movie now if you want to take the time to read through the list. The PDF format has a size limitation of 200 inches by 200 inches, or a little over 5 by 5 meters. This limitation, which is especially important in the fast-growing large format printing market, is overcome by adding a scaling factor in the PDF. When you create an 800 by 800 inches document in Photoshop, then Photoshop will save this in the PDF as 200 by 200 with a scale factor, or user unit as it is sometimes called, of 4. The inspector will now show you these values. You either see the defined values, 200 by 200, with a page scaling factor of 4, or you see the effective value of 800 by 800 inches. In the color management settings of PitStop, you can choose the use of the engine Little CMS. The version of that engine has been upgraded to version 2.5. Especially important is the implementation of the new blackpoint compensation algorithm actually being standardized by ISO and ICC. More information can be found on the Little CMS website. Also in the area of color management, we now include the Adobe RGB ICC profiles as part of the installation. As a result, we have changed some of the default color spaces. The CMYK default is now the ISO-coded V2 profile, and the RGB default is the Adobe RGB 1998 profile. As a result of this change, the generic and focus profiles no longer go by that name. They were copies of the Fuji generic profiles, so you can use those instead. Existing PitStop Server hot folders using generic and focus profiles do not have to be changed. They will work as before. The rasterizing functionality in the actions Replace Page by Bitmap and Rasterize Page Content Keeping Text now supports anti-aliasing, which increases the quality of the created image. You do not see anything in the user interface, but here you see the difference between some small text rasterized in previous versions and the same text rasterized in this version. This quality improvement is particularly important when repurposing files for tablets. There is now support for JPEG 2000 as a compression method. You will see this option available whenever you can select a compression algorithm, in the Preflight Profile Editor, in Global Changes, and in Action Lists. The PitStop Server command line interface and the PitStop Server configurator have been rewritten to be leaner and more efficient. The PitStop Server configurator is now installed together with PitStop Server and not with Switch. This means there is no longer a dependency between the Switch version and the PitStop Server version. So when you get a new PitStop Server version, you install that, and the matching configurator is automatically added to Switch. It is not necessary to have PitStop Server open when using it inside Switch, but now you get something extra when you do. PitStop Server will show you the processing of the files that come from Switch. This is interesting if you want to analyze throughput and speed, or if you want to check on the progress status of very large files. As this takes up extra resources, we do not recommend using this all the time. The final new feature in this presentation is that you now see the computer, IP address, and port number of the floating license server that PitStop Workgroup Manager is connected to. It is a small cosmetic change, but it makes it a lot easier for the person who is managing the floating licenses. We are sure you will be able to benefit from some of the many new features of PitStop 12 Update 2 that were presented here. Thank you for watching.